anyway, let's get
Okay,
into our text
let's
here
get
today.
into it.
So, as we did cover, we are looking at Colum McCann's "What Time Is It Now? Where You Are," and I guess we've been starting all of our texts off with a little bit of contextualization. So, let's
Mhm,
start off with the following question here, Bill. How does
mhm.
Colum McCann's background and the socio-political climate of the time in which he wrote this text influence the story's narrative?
Okay. So Colum McCann, he's a really acclaimed Irish author whose works often focuses on like identity, connection. That's kind of more so his thing. But as I said, Irish author, although I believe he's been residing for a while now in the United States. And so I think on one hand, he uses his own personal experiences of living in various cultural settings and locations, because you'll see that he uses that to enhance the depth of the human interaction and connection in response to distance. So
Mm,
when we're looking at what time is it now where you are, it's, I'll get into it more so, but it's the story of a Marine on New Year's Eve in Afghanistan in their outpost, and with a satellite phone waiting for midnight to have that phone call with their family. That typical,
mm,
well, I don't know, is depends where you are reception wise, but you know how you always wait till midnight and then that's when the phone calls come in, that's when the text
yeah.
messages come in. So yeah, a very like normal thing, but
Mm,
I think the beauty of that connection is seen even more deeply or felt more deeply because of how he uses the distance in the text.
mm, mm,
So in terms of like the social political climate, McCann, he wrote this story for initially appeared on the Washington Post, 2013 November, so right before New Year's. Eventually, it made its way into his novella 13 Ways of Looking, which some people might know is in the prescriptions as well.
yeah.
But he's really, I think, given that it's a Marine in Afghanistan, he's really influenced by that post 9/11 societal landscape of like war and distance, and
Mm,
the terror in that not only the physical distance there, but for him, I think the emotional distance.
yeah.
But there is that aspect of like global way that we can have interaction. So the soldier is So the narrative or the short story first appeared in the Washington Post in November of 2013. Eventually, it makes his way into his novella 13 Ways of Looking, which some people might note is in the prescriptions as well. But the story being that it's a Marine in Afghanistan on post during New Year's Eve. It's really reflecting that post 9/11 societal landscape.
Mm,
The distance, the army lifestyle, all those things. And so the story in that regard is reflecting some globalization and also technological advancements,
yeah.
because in the story the Marine has access to a satellite phone that they're going to use to connect with their family at midnight. And so that technological advancement is highlighting how technology is helping human interactions.
Mm,
So the other thing I think as well, context-wise, from a more literary level, it is a metafictional short story. So through the third person perspective, the plot line is a writer, which he dubs he, although you can see how he perhaps is also Colum McCann because it aligns with his own context.
mm,
But
mm,
the idea is that he's a writer. He's been asked to create a New Year's Eve story, for a paper, so for the Washington Post. And so as he tells the story of this Marine Sandy, it's taking us through his writing post process in how he
mm,
crafts Sandy and crafts the characters and makes it a narrative, a story. Yeah.
yeah.
So through Sandy and that American Marine in Afghanistan, he's able to navigate like ideas of time, distance, the interconnectedness of our lives despite this physical difference, and just really how individuals relate to one another across these geographical and emotional landscapes.
So definitely, yeah, there's a few different sort of contextual elements that we're looking at, and sounds like a very, very interesting sort of text. I
Mm,
definitely am looking forward to getting into this with my
yeah.
students this following term as well. So it's going to be good sort of stuff, and you can see the sort of follow on or lead ons from even last week's text that we looked at from Nam Lee. So the differences are there, and it's a nice sort of way to build, I guess, if you're looking at different sets of text as a teacher. So no, definitely you've covered a lot there in terms of our context. Let's move on to purpose now. So what do you believe is McCann's primary purpose in writing this story? Or like what was his sort of intention there, and how does he convey that purpose to the narrative choices that he makes? So that intentional construction of the text in order to shape meaning. Yeah.
So he sets that up really early on through the he writer character, where he says his aim is to defy his own notions of what a New Year's Eve story could be. So again, it's that third person because it allows us to get into the different characters, but straight away we're set up with this really postmodern idea of defying, preconceived notions of a New Year's story. And so that really sets up the narrative. But what he's also trying to do is he's really trying to take us through this creativity and this writing process. So for McCann, it's this selection of choices in the story. And early on, he starts with the let's say this and let's say that. And it really allows that rhetorical and that stream of consciousness allows for this idea of the possibilities in creative writing. So on one hand, you've got that purpose of trying to showcase the process of writing. And, the story starts to take shape, and he uses the phrases of once I landed on the idea or the essence of the story. And, he even says kind of midway through this actual short story, you can see where he's becoming more selective in what his story is going to be now. He's starting to really reaffirm what's taking place and how it's being shaped. And he says he cannot get this phrase out of his mind, the living and the dead. So McCann, I think his other purpose is really trying to explore the nature of human connection in a world that can be marked by both physical and emotional distance. So he's trying to, I think, on one hand as well, question or bring the question of how individuals perceive our time, how we pass the time, and the idea of time and space in terms of our relationships, because he gives you a snapshot of, obviously, his protagonist, Sandy, and I'll talk about her more shortly, but she's sort of the main character, so we get a bit more of her time and place and space, but you also get that a little bit with her wife, the character of her wife, Kimberly, and of her stepson, Joel. So he really tries to give you that sense of difference in time and space and what's going on for the characters where they are in the span of this relationship. So the title seems quite physical, and it is, but there's also that that more emotional time and place and that difference in perspective. And we'll talk about that more as I get into like the stylistic features. But he's really trying to encourage, I think, purpose-wise, through that, encourage readers to reflect on the significance of these small and simple and maybe more ritualistic interactions as like a way to connect and a desire of connection amidst, isolation that we might be feeling. So she's obviously, isolated on all fronts where she is in Afghanistan. And so as through her story and through that metafictional approach, the readers along with her are starting to understand this need for connection amidst isolation.
Yeah, cool. It definitely has a few different sort of bits and pieces there that you've covered that you can really get your students to delve into when we're looking at purpose. So thank you for those key pointers there. Let's move on to the structure and style now. So in what ways does the structure and style of What Time Is It Now, where you are, enhance the reader's understanding of the narrative, and how does McCann's use of the non-linear storytelling affect that emotional sort of impact of the story?
Okay. So I did talk about it just then briefly, but that idea of the postmodern nature of the text. So it goes hand in hand with the metafictional aspects, because part of his point in this text is to thwart readers' expectations. You know, as I said before in those opening lines, he doesn't want to do your typical New Year's Eve story of a party or something, you know, that we expect to see. He wants to present something that is not expected and maybe therefore leaves their reader in thought. So what he's presenting structurally is the power of the author. Every time he's being really metafictional, where he's taking you through how he's building the character, and I've got some quotes to help you with that as well, but he's showcasing the power of an author. Obviously, he's the author and he has power there, but is really great way for advanced students to not only see the writing process, but also perhaps to mirror that process if they need that help when they're building their own. Yeah, the other thing that I think is really strong is the title itself, because you could just think it just represents the plot, but it's also representing that metaphorical distance we have in our human connections. And sometimes we're distant even if we're not physically distant. And then the inverse too. We can also be close even if we're not physically close. So there's also a nice tie back to that quote in the narrative where her stepson Joel says to his mum Kimberly, "What time is it now where she is?" And it's also got the comma there is a very deliberate choice in slowing down, offering a pause, so that, again, in a postmodern lens, the reader can really think and reflect and evaluate on perhaps the more subtle messaging that's coming across here. Structurally as well, you'll see that there's 13 sections, so it's just divided up into 13 different parts, and those sections allow for the writer's process and observation. So in the first maybe 1 to 3 sections, he's telling us about how he's got to write this story, how he's having a bit of writer's block. It introduces us to, I'm going to do it somewhere different. Let's do it in Afghanistan. And so as the 13 sections come across in the story, it's actually taking you deeper and deeper into the process, where he starts building the other characters, where he starts reflecting on how he's going to end the piece. So it's really important, those 13 sections, but I think the most important structurally is the last part, which he's got the 13 sections and he calls it 13 redux, and it's actually only one line, and the line reads, "The phone rings, it rings and rings and rings," and that leaves the readers to make their own interpretation on the New Year's Eve phone call, but also that allows for an expansion on perspective, because one of the beauties, I think, of this piece is the details are not that important. And I know, like, sometimes I feel that's very contrary to what we say in narrative writing, but in a sense that they are important, but what's more important is the process and the intention in the story. Yes, so the process in building the character and the intention of what he wants the readers to get out of it is more important than the real details of the who, what, when, where, why. And that, I think, is very represented in here by the way he uses rhetorical questions when he's introducing the characters. But there's a real simplicity in ending with that last line. And I think as well, that represents the structure too, because you've had these 12 sections beforehand, a couple pages each, where you're building up to this ending, and then the ending is one line. And that itself comes back really nicely to the purpose of the piece. Is what he wanted is the beauty in the small and the everyday things. We don't need to know what the conversation is. The importance was, I think, having that conversation and that aspect of connection. It's pretty interesting, isn't it? Like, as I said, it kind of, we will always want a nitty-gritty backstory for everybody taking place. You do get a bit of a backstory for Sandy, but it's more brought up as rhetorical questions for Joel and Kimberly. So you have somewhat of a sense of their character, but the ins and outs of them are not important, because he's coming back to that idea of the phone call and the connection. So that non-linear style of storytelling allows that, because you have on one hand he, as in the writer's contemplative tone, where he's trying to invite the reader to engage in this process and the possibility of the characters. So he says, for example, did she meet Sandy on a college campus? Did she join the Marines after a breakup? So there's all these did she or how or what with a question mark to almost build a possibility of a backstory, which gives them a power to the reader as well, because they can formulate it's okay that we all have that difference in perspective. We still come back to that same end point of that importance of that connection and conversation. So, the writer character of he is dramatizing how an author would create their characters and create their plot lines and what they want to achieve with the ending of their piece. And I'll just quickly add for that as well with structure and style is what he's doing with characterization. So because he's got that metafictional style, when he's inventing Sandy and who she is and why it's New Year's Eve, he starts with the phrase, let's say, and he gives all these options. Let's say she's a young lady. Let's say she has a family. Let's say she's 26. So I really personally resonate with this metafictional process because I know when I was a student and when I did creative writing at university, I'm definitely not, I know every nitty gritty and I need to do it little. I like that overall starting point. Let's see where it leads, pull it back at it. This is my end goal and what can I do and play around with to get myself there. So I really like the way he mimics this process because it's so helpful for students. If you've got a student sitting there saying, I don't know how to start, you read the first few pages and you say, mimic that, start like that. And that's the beauty of it is that the possibilities are endless. And that's a really nice to the Mod C rubric as well, that we all have our own aesthetic and our style and it's about the process, and that aligns really, really nicely because he even says when he's developing the story, though he still has little idea of what exactly Sandy might say, she's beginning to become a little more complex for him. So you can see in real time with that introspective tone of his and that stream of consciousness style, teasing out who the character is going to be. And these are great questions that you can also ask your students. Like even if you pulled a few of them out, you could say the same thing. Well, who is she? How old is she? Why is she there? What is she feeling? What's the tension? So, it works really well in like a bit of a how-to as well as a nice text to look at in terms of crafting because you've also got she's the focus character and you've got the additional characters of Kimberly and Joel but they're not really fleshed out and they're deliberately not meant to be. They're postmodern constructs and that's kind of also their role in that story. So he's also got like a nice writing style that that lets you notice the emotional connection and also isolation, and maybe I can cover that a bit more when we're looking at the language features.
And I like that sort of idea where you're talking about these ideas of constructs and those postmodern sort of readings of the text, and it's something that you can get your kids to consider. You don't, like you was mentioning before, you don't need every single bit of detail because you want to give the reader a little bit of that imaginative space in order to contemplate, what's going on in this text. What is the message here? How can I read into this? And that's something that we really want to engage our students with. So it's definitely a focus area that you may consider really delving into for your students and their writing. So
like how nice is that for tension? And I think it takes a bit of pressure off. Like if you find your students are really daunted by the fact, like it takes a bit of pressure off. Like you just got to get started. And I know you and I are really big on the drafting process with our students and creative writing, that it's never going to be perfect. And perhaps there's always something that can be changed or shifted or added. But I think it takes a bit of pressure off when they know they can let the story unravel a bit as well.
I think it's also like, we let's be honest here, creative writing is a very subjectively sort of marked area in the HSC as well. So this gives your students a little bit of space now. I know myself as like, moving into this Mod C sort of area and having a bit of time marking this section, I definitely appreciate the texts that give me that sort of idea. So, okay, cool. Like I've got a bit of time now to think about, oh, could this character be this? Could this be this? Or like, what do they represent? What construct are they, as you sort of been speaking about in this text? And I think that's something, like I said, that adds that bit of flair and that personal sort of
Yes.
voice to your students' texts. So it's
Yes.
definitely, like I say, like it's good that you've emphasized that here today. And I think it's definitely a point for teachers to take a hold of.
Yeah.
And if, you're a student listening, definitely listen to this, this idea here. It's constructs. You don't need to give your whole life story or backstory for each of your characters or
Yeah.
every piece of
Yeah.
detail of the setting. It's weird. We sort of have this fine line between enough detail, just enough, but
Yes.
then having that space for thing. And then,
Yeah.
as you sort of mentioned there, like the drafting process is something where I, I might really like a piece, but then it's like someone else, give other eyes a look at this. And I think when we're considering this, what you've just mentioned here in terms of the way that Colin McCann sort of uses this style and this structure in his pieces, it's fantastic. It's fantastic to mimic for your students. So I
Yes.
definitely think that's fantastic. Yeah, no,
Because
well
I
done there,
think
Bill.
just one more thing before I forget, because I think it aligns nicely. I was just thinking now about how he's doing that metafiction and he's reflecting on his story. That might also
Mm,
be a good way to get students to think about their future reflection statements that go with their narrative
mm,
as well.
no, yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, because who knows? They might have that part A and B, and yeah, it's all about playing the game. It's all about prepping them for
Yes.
the HSC at the end
Yes.
of the day, and
All
this
the
is why we sort of do
possibilities.
this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so we want to prep them for all of those. But let's move forward. Let's move into some of the language features now of this text, which you
Mm-hmm.
sort of covered a little bit already. But how do McCann's use of imagery and metaphor in this text contribute to the overall meaning of the story, and what effect do these language features have on our experience as the readers?
Yeah, I think one of the other things I really like about McCann's writing in this piece is I wouldn't say it's simple. What I would say is it's accessible. You
Mm,
know,
mm,
it's not necessarily overly flowery or anything like that, but his diction is very selective here. Like it's
yeah,
so succinct, yeah, and so where he does have that vivid imagery, he's really, yes, it's the imagery can be visual, but at the same time he's also using that and his word choice to create more of an emotional landscape,
yeah,
to offer like a more profound feeling in that moment. So he has some very nice imagery when he's introducing the setting of Sandy's outpost. So, in the narrative, he talks about, why is she out there on her own? Like, there's an element of what's the thing? The
mm,
suspension of belief.
yeah,
But yeah, and then he starts to craft the setting around her, and he's got this really striking imagery where he refers to it as an area where even the stunted trees might seem as if they want to step off the cliffs and hurtle themselves on the valley floor. So I love that because it's that imagery of wanting to hide, wanting to take cover. You're so exposed, like the desolation. He's introducing the heightened and dangerous environment
mm,
that Sandy is in. But not only is it physically dangerous, but that link to that emotional disconnection and
mm,
desolation and isolate, that her isolation from her family and her home is further deepened by the setting around her. And I just think
yeah,
that's a lovely detail there. Um, then there's also some other imagery and a bit of metaphor in there as well. So particularly when he's trying to emphasize the time and distance. So there's a part where he's developing a little bit of Kimberly, her wife's story, building the anticipation of her cooking while she's it's New Year's Eve, she's cooking a nice meal and she's waiting for that call to come in.
mm,
So he's building that tension as well. So it's really clever because I think the way he builds tension in this is quite unique. It's not typical from some of the other narratives we might have read to our students. He's really thinking of unique and nuanced ways to do that. But he says in third person of Kimberly, this to her is the essence of the season, the
yeah,
loneliness, the longing, the beauty. She reaches for a spoon and begins to stir. And I think, again, it's such a simple but powerful statement where it's all these contradictory feelings together, which is so uniquely human. So the language is very much, trying to evoke this contemplative mood in all the characters, in the writer, in Sandy, a little bit in Kimberly, a little bit in Joel's story, but really using that contemplative and that mood and the build up for New Year's Eve to build the tension in the story and the characters in that phone call. Yeah, because then he even says, when he's talking about the possibilities of the ending of his story, he says for Sandy, she will simply say Happy New Year in the most ordinary way, and they will return the greeting, and life will go on, since this is what our New Years are about, our connections, our bonds, no matter how inconsequential. And the story will be quiet and slip its way into its own new year. And it's so lovely when you feel that, because it's the beauty of the simplicity, and I think even the beauty of like the mundane or the ordinary things in life. I think he's really trying to give a profoundness to the beauty of the simple things, because it's very easy to get carried away with the big things and the big events, but like the beauty of live in the moment and enjoy something for what it is. Well, that's kind of what I get out of it, because then he shifts into the writer's perspective and says, what about the sense of promise the Januaries used to bring to his boyhood? So yeah, there's just so much there, I think, to tease out and talk emotion wise. And then we get to the final end, the final line, of the phone, it rings. And right before that, he says, and I think this ties back nicely to purpose as well, how do we go back to the very simplicity of the original notion? How do we sit with Sandy in her lonely outpost? How do we look out into the dark? And I think there's so much metaphorically that could be said about those lines.
Yeah, well, no, definitely. And it's something that you've just mentioned here. It's something that you as a teacher, we've just sort of given you a few pointers here as to the metaphors and, the use of imagery here. But you as teachers really want to, take a hold of these and delve into this, unpack these, brainstorm, craft things out with your students. And Bill, you've definitely given a few areas there for us to really go and explore, I think. But let's move forward into some of the key ideas and themes, just as a final sort of part here. So what are some of the central themes that are explored in this text? And how do they reflect the complexities of human connection in such a fragmented world?
Yeah. So I think that's a nice way to look at it with your class in terms of purpose, this idea of human connection in a fragmented world. And then you can explore with each of the characters in what ways are their worlds fragmented and why. And you can do that for even the writer and for all four characters there. But if you want to break down in terms of thematics, because I think thematics might be a nice way to get students to springboard off of this. So it also works really nice with any of your other modules where you're looking at love, relationships, connection. But in terms of you can see it's very accessible, hey. But in terms of some themes to branch off of, so the idea of time and perception. So we're looking here at this very subjective experience of time and how it impacts individuals, because you could look at Sandy here. You could look at the writer, because the writer as well, through the metafiction, he takes you through, now it's this month, now it's that month, the deadline is looming and I haven't done this. So it's really cool how all the characters have some sort of engagement with time and how they perceive time. So that's one good one. Obviously, human connection as a thematic concern. So, you can maybe look at how the text is trying to highlight the importance of brief yet meaningful interactions, even across distance. This might be a nice theme to springboard off of and say to your students, could you create a new character in a new situation that's also emphasizing this idea, for example? This distance and isolation. So looking at characters or narratives where there's a contrast in physical proximity and emotion, and is there connection, is there disconnection? You could even look at that in modern life. You could get your students to look at, why is it that with all the technology and social media we have, that people still feel as disconnected as ever, and so students could look at the nuances in that and represent this theme, but in a very new, unique lens. And then maybe two more. There's a bit of a cultural intersection here, and perhaps not so much ethnic culture, but there is a tidbit of that, but also socially, different family systems, different situations. This idea of even maybe that shared experience can bridge divides and foster some empathy and some more connection. And then lastly, there is a very metaphysical or existential element to this text, where it's very much inviting this contemplation of, the fleeting and brief moments of life and how they might impact our own sense of understanding or our own identity. Yeah, so you can see that just off those, there's so much to work with here. And the beauty, I think, as well, is because it's such a postmodern text, and the questions are posed to the reader and there's so many possibilities, there's then also so much possibility to springboard off that as well.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. Yeah, no, that's some great sort of insight you provided our listeners with here, Bill, today. Just want to say thank you for your insight, and hopefully we've given your listeners a bit of sort of something to work with. I think that's sort of like our goal. It's we were giving you guys sort of what has worked for us, what we see, and take this, make this your own. Eventually, when we start popping out our resources and stuff as well, the same thing. Use it to benefit your teaching and your pedagogy, because that's sort of, we want you to be empowered with the confidence to go out and just try new things. That's the best way we learn as teachers. Every year we do things differently. Every year we get a new different bunch of students with different abilities and different levels and different sort of insights, and it's just fantastic to sort of have these springboards for us. So yeah, look, thank you once again, Bill, for going through this text. It's a fantastic text. I can't wait, like I said before, to get into this with my students moving into term 2 after this little break. So I myself might listen to this again and listen to some of the things that you've mentioned in today's podcast and
Lovely.
sort of go off and write some notes down. But look, it's been fantastic.
And I'd love to hear as well what new things you noted with your students, because I think you're spot on. Creative writing and creative interpretation, it is very subjective, and the beauty of multiple minds is multiple perspectives. And we say to I say to my students, show other people, show other teachers if they're happy to look, get more insight. And I really feel like as an English teacher that's something that works so much on my pedagogy and for my skills is talking to other teachers who also do these texts or have new interpretations. I think that's the beauty of it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Definitely don't be closed off. Really, definitely with your students as well. Get them to show other people. It's probably one of the best pieces of advice that we can probably give you is, have those multiple perspectives and multiple voices helping to shape and craft these pieces of work that you're, guiding your students with. But no, thank you once again. So if you are liking what you guys are hearing, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment. Please comment on our Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, but Spotify in particular, if you are listening through Spotify, put some comments. We'd love to hear what you guys think, what you guys want to listen to. And we'll definitely be looking to produce, what our community is wanting to listen to. So thank you once again, Bill, for just going through this. You're wonderful. And
pleasure.
thanks.